and thank you everyone for coming here on this beautiful Saturday morning. My name is Bingran. You can just call me Bing. I am a PhD student at USC, and I mostly study marine sediments, bacteria living in marine sediments. So today I'm going to talk to you about them. And the title of my talk is Life in the Darkness, Microorganisms on the Sediment. So we have a little bit technical difficulty here, so bear with me. We have all seen this beautiful picture before. It's a breathtaking view of the Earth from space in the 1972 Apollo 17 mission. In this image, we can clearly see this translucent blue extending along the African coast all the way to Antarctica. Then that is our ocean. And the ocean covers about 71% of the Earth's surface, and it takes up about 90% of the habitable space by volume on our Earth. But we don't really need a beautiful picture for us to appreciate our ocean. We just, since ancient times, humans have fostered this intimate relationship with the ocean. And just like our ancestors, we are also drawn to it. We like to look at the crashing waves, and we like to dive in and just swim with all these fascinating creatures living in the ocean. And right here in the water surrounding Catalina Island, we have beautiful kelp forests, and we have diverse fish, bird, and mammal population. And the basis of all this great biodiversity is photosynthesis. So when we think about photosynthesis, the first thing that comes to mind is normally land plants. However, the photosynthesis in the ocean actually accounts for about 50% of the oxygen reserve on Earth. And as a matter of fact, the biggest contributors in the ocean that does the photosynthesis is not the macroalgae that we see, not the kelp, not the corals, but it's actually the microscopic single-celled phytoplankton. And one significant group of the phytoplankton is the Cyanobacteria, and they're previously named the blue-green algae. It is a very appropriate name, as you can tell from this picture of a Cyanobacteria bloom. The cyanos, they are very special, not only just due to their sheer abundance, but they basically invented the game of photosynthesis. Fossil records have shown that cyanobacteria probably appeared on Earth about 3.5 billion years ago. And it took them a while, about 800 million years, before they were able to start using the energy from the sun to split water, which, by the way, is the process that us humans have been trying very hard to replicate, but we still haven't gone so far with it. So the cyanobacteria, they were able to do this, and from the first step, the energy released was used by the cyanos to fix carbon dioxide into sugar. So for the cyanos back then, the oxygen was really just a waste product. They don't need it, and it might actually be very toxic to them, since the organism back then, they have never encountered such a powerful oxidative molecule. But it was probably the best waste product of all history, and it had made life the way it is right now. So for the cyanos, what they really need is the first step, where they harvest the energy from the sun to split the water. And they were able to do so through a process called chemiosmosis. So the first step is all about electrons. So the electrons were stripped from an electron donor, and in the case of photosynthesis, it was water. So they were moving this electron from water through a chain of carriers to an acceptor. It could be an oxygen, it could be oxidized iron, that basically anything that really want to take in that electron. And during the carrier process of the transfer process of electron, there are energy released, and they were able to use the energy released from the electron transfer to pump proton across the membrane. So eventually we end up with this proton gradient right at the membrane, and it is a bit similar to a hydroelectric dam, where when the water falls from the hilltop, and it falls from the hilltop and it drives a turbine at the bottom, and it turns the turbine and generate electricity. And the cells were able to do that. They pump as the proton moves from the side where there is higher ion concentration to the side where there's less ion concentration. They were able to generate ATP, which is an energy currency that basically powers all walks of life. And this process, chemiosmosis, is not just for photosynthesis. It's basically how all living organisms generate energy. And for humans, this is how we get our energy from food. But in the ocean, photosynthesis, it's great. It generates oxygen, it makes sugar, but it only happens at the very top of the ocean where there is sunlight penetration. And below that, there is a vast water body of an average depth of 4 kilometers where there's no sunlight at all, and it is completely dark. And photosynthesis is impossible. So the question is, are there any lives there? And for the longest time, people believed that sunlight was the only source for energy. Therefore, the dark zone of the ocean should really be the dead zone. And that idea changed around 1977. So the US research vessel, RV Atlantis, took a group of scientists to investigate a previously unnoticed anomaly where they found warm water plumes just along Galapagos Rift, and without any identifiable source of heating. So scientists believe that there might be underwater hydrothermal vents, just like the ones that we found on land. The RV Atlantis, it was equipped with a submersible Alvin, which can dive down to the bottom of the ocean, and Alvin indeed found hydrothermal vents, which was not a real surprise because scientists has sort of see this coming. But what really shocked them was just the sheer exuberance of life on the backdrop of boiling black smoke. So this is what they found. There were giant tube worms, clams, mussels, and giant squids. They populated almost every inch of the black chimney, and it was so unexpected that the entire research crews, no one thought of bringing any reagents to preserve the sample, because at that time, life in the darkness was unthinkable. So the anecdote here is that in the end, it was actually a bottle of Russian vodka that saved the day, so that the scientists could extract the sample, and then they preserved it and took them back to lab for analysis. So then came the question, what was where is this energy coming from? What is supporting this beautiful ecosystem right there? And after some thermodynamic calculation, chemical analyses, and lab testing, they found out that there was a group of microorganisms that can use the energy from hydrogen sulfide. So in this case, it was electron transferred from hydrogen sulfide to oxygen. And it was not long before scientists started to wonder whether the hydrothermal vent system could be where all life started, because it was the life before, so the Earth before life, it was full of hydrogen sulfide. It was a very reducing environment. It was very acidic, and the hydrothermal vent system really resembled that. And after the thinking process, it felt like it really was possible. So the electron transport, so the energy generating process, It was from hydrogen sulfide to an electron acceptor. But back then there was no oxygen, so the first cell was probably able to use an oxidized iron as electron acceptor. So the electron transfer from hydrogen sulfide to iron would be the energy generating process. And there is actually a natural proton gradient just present in the vents, because the vent fluid, it was very acidic, so it's very rich in hydrogen ion as proton, but not in the surrounding seawater. So there is already a proton gradient present. And also there is a lot of carbon dioxide, so inorganic carbon to begin with, so that the organism that were able to fix the inorganic carbon to organic carbon. But of course, they realized that the electron transfer from hydrogen sulfide to iron was not that great of energy source. So to use that energy to fix carbon was a little bit difficult. So the scientists came up with the idea that instead of carbon dioxide, it was carbon monoxide was the initial inorganic carbon, and they were able to use that to generate organic material, which was the building block of life. So it all looked great, but there is one big problem, is that all this organic material that has been generated would very quickly dissipate into the surrounding seawater. So they could never accumulate into a concentration high enough so that these organic material can interact with each other and build into more complicated form. And so it's the idea that hydrothermal vents being the origin of life, a not so great idea. Until a different type of vent was discovered. So the hydrothermal vents, in the previous slide, I'm just going to refer them as black smokers from now on. So the black smokers, they are found on the ocean ridge, where two tectonic plates are moving apart from each other. And ocean water is drawn into the volcanic complex beneath, and this superheated seawater, and along with magma, vents out this fissure, and that forms the black smokers. But off the axis of this volcanic hotspots, slow movements of fresh crust across the seafloor could expose new rocks that derived from the mantle. And these freshly formed sea rocks could react with seawater in a process called serpentinization. And this formed a different type of vents. These ones, they differentiate from the black smokers in many different ways. So first, the process called the serpentinization generates a lot of hydrogen gas. And the vent fluid here, it's not as hot as the black smokers, which could be about 400 degrees Celsius. But here, the water is relatively colder. It's only about 45 to 90 degrees Celsius. And it's alkaline with a pH of 9 to 11, which is also different from the black smokers. And this alkaline vent fluid reacts with the surrounding seawater and forms the calcium carbonate chimneys. So that's are these white chimneys as opposed to the black chimneys you found at black smokers. And these calcium carbonate chimneys can be as tall as 60 meters. So, and now I'd like to just focus on these three important points. So first, these vent fluids, they are rich in hydrogen, and hydrogen is a molecule with a strong reducing power. So it could be actually a great potential electron donor. And the temperature there was not so hot, so it's still possible for life. And it's an alkaline vent fluid, so there is, again, as the vent fluid moves from the vent to the surrounding seawater, where it's rich in carbon dioxide, which makes the seawater acidic, so there's already another natural proton gradient. So now what we have is an actual proton gradient, and we have potential electron transfer there, so there's energy, and it has carbon source, which is the carbon dioxide from the surrounding seawater. And another great discovery from this vent is that these carbonate chimney, they have all these microscopic compartments, which sort of solve the problem that we encountered with the black smoker. So the organic carbon that was formed by probably the earliest reaction there would be enclosed in these microscopic compartments where they can meet each other, and then these interaction between the simple organic material could give rise to more complex structure and perhaps our first cell. So of course there are many studies about this going on right now. We still don't know for sure, but this is a very, I would say, popular theory out there right now for origin of life. So since the first discovery of hydrothermal vents about only 5 decades ago, they have generated heated discussions and revolutionized our ways of viewing life. New vent sites are being discovered and investigated every year, and scientists estimate that there are even more vents than the current known distribution. But when you look at the map here, you can't ignore what's the rest of the sediment, right? The vents are only what you see as in the red dots. There are still massive land around there. And what do they look like? And quite frankly, it's a bit boring. And maybe this is indeed a dead zone. When you think about it, it probably makes sense because there is no oxygen, there is no sunlight, it's perpetually cold. It's not really a very good place to live. But if there's one thing that we have learned about bacteria, is that they are tenacious. They have been around before everything else, and they have adapted to environments basically anywhere on Earth, and it's unlikely that they haven't inhabited marine sediments, this vast land. And indeed, there are a lot of them in marine sediments. So on the figure shown on the left here, what we are seeing is the cell abundance in the ocean. So throughout the average 4-kilometer depth, the cell abundance is about 10 to the 6 cells per milliliter of seawater. So just a milliliter of seawater, you will see about 1 million bacteria in them. And that number increases by 3 orders of magnitude when you go to marine sediments. So a cubic centimeter of marine sediments, surface sediments, there could be 1 billion bacteria living in them. And as you go deeper, the ocean topography is not flat. So there are places that only have 1 meter water coverage, but there are also sediments that have 8 kilometers of water coverage. So when you go into the sediments that are very, very deep as 8 kilometers, there are still life there. Even though they are not as comparable as the ones that are just right in surface sediment. And how do they get their energy? Because there is not really primary production, and there is no hydrothermal activity that generates generates the energy needed for life. So let's go back to the surface. So this is a map showing global primary production, which is just another term for photosynthesis. So here, what you're showing, the greener it is, there's higher primary production. So what we're seeing is there are a lot more photosynthesis happening along the coast and on the equator. And as these organic material being formed, they sink. And throughout the water column, some of the organic material is getting used by other organisms as well. but there are some that escape these degradation and sinks to the bottom. And these are the organic material, and these are the electron donors used by the microbes that are living in surface sediments. And as these organic material sinks down to the bottom, they act as electron donor, so they helps bacteria to generate ATP. So the bacteria living in the sediments, they have figured out different ways to harness that energy, meaning that they're using different types of electron acceptors to complete the electron transfer. So oxygen is really scarce. As you go deeper into the sediment, it's quickly being used up. But there are other ones such as nitrate, manganese, iron, sulfate, and carbon dioxide. So microbes that they can use these all different kinds of electron acceptors, and this really tied the microbial communities in the sediments into the global cycling of all these different chemicals. And as the organic material being degraded by these microorganisms, there is another very interesting gas being produced, which is methane. It's a greenhouse gas. Is produced during the degradation of organic material, and especially in areas where there is a lot of primary productivity at the surface. So in coastal areas, in equatorial areas, where the abundance of organic material goes to the bottom and they get buried, but they still, the microorganisms were still able to find them and degrade them and release the methane. So in this area, you would actually see methane gas bubbles out of the sediment. And microorganisms, they were able to use methane again as electron donor to generate energy. So there's another group of bacteria that could harvest this energy. So now we have seen areas that with a lot of organic material being produced and goes down to the bottom, but there are still large area in the ocean where it's basically no primary productivity. So there's nothing goes to the bottom, and there are still cells there. And how do they live? And this really brings us to asking the question about life at energy limit. So the cells in this area, they see very little input of organic material from above, and they are not living in environments where it's constant exchange and flux of energy, but they are still able to live. People might say that they are not really growing, because the doubling time, the longest doubling time they have found for bacteria that are living in deep surface is about 1,000 years. So 1,000 years, they're not basically doing anything. But in natural environments, material gets degraded. So the cells, even though it's not growing, it's still doing a lot to resist this natural degradation. And there are damages to their DNA, so they have to constantly repair and maintain this constant growth, or this just maintaining. It's a lot of energy, and they are not getting that energy from anywhere. So it's still quite amazing to us that how they do it. And then probably there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from the microscope, from the microbial organisms, such as maybe they have some very stable compound in their cell material that can resist this degradation, and maybe we can use that in food preservative or pharmaceutical production. And how are they able to repair their DNA and repair their damaged protein in a very efficient way? If we can learn how that happens, it could be very helpful for us to battle different health problems. Okay. So the microbial organisms living in deep sea. They are quite amazing. I hope that I have convinced you during this time right here. And they are major players in the biogeochemical cycles on Earth. They give us insight on origin of life, and they have so many different versatile energy generating processes that we still don't know a lot about. And scientific research is still going on, and we are trying to know as much as we can, and hopefully next time you come back here, I'll give you a little bit more information. All right, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are all mainly I'll take any questions.
So for the distribution of underwater vents, how are you detecting new vents?
It's a very good question. So there are submersibles that goes out, and then also people put the information that they get into models. So we have a lot of geological information that we gather, and then I think mostly through the models and input organic material. People are how basically we know.
You say that if we discovered more about the organisms that live where there's not much falling down, that we could help repair like damage, health problems. What type of health problems?
So it's a very good question. So I think everything at this point is still in speculation, I would say. But most of the disease that we get is some sort of damage done to our body, and we're not be able to repair it, or not be able to repair it in a very efficient way. And if the cells that are able to do it, we want to know how. But yeah, there are a lot more to this, but that's the basic idea that I get.
The different types of vents that were found, one of them was kind of the colder one that looked like it was growing like a white garret. What was that one called?
It's alkaline vents. The name is usually they call it the serpentinization, and then you can either call it white chimneys or alkaline vents.
Okay, I like white chimneys.
Okay.
The question I had was, is that similar to what we see like up in Mono Lake?
In Mono Lake?
Yeah.
That's more like a land-based, if I understand correctly.
Yeah. They just look the same. So
yeah.
Curious.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions, we'll go ahead and thank Bing so much for that presentation.